actually see the fireworks? I feel like no one. Yeah, online. Okay. You at least saw some footage. Oh, you saw like just the flare. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's awesome. There was this one time I went to Taiwan, and I didn't know these fireworks were illegal when I bought them, but I bought them, brought them back to my Airbnb, and it was a quiet neighborhood, and I didn't mean to ruin their silence, but I just thought it'd be fun to light off all these firecrackers and like mortars, and they were actually like scary fireworks. They're the ones that like shoot up and boom, you know, big explosion. And so I lit them off, and me and my buddy are like running and jumping over it to see if we can like make it before it shoots. Dumb stuff. And then just the whole neighborhood started getting real mad, like coming outside, and they got their pitchforks and trying to scare us away. The only English that they were like, no, 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 you know, it got a little chaotic, but anywho, we didn't get arrested, it was fun. All right, we are going to get in a new series today. What? No, fine, no, clean hands. We are going to be in a new series we entitled Year After Year, going through the book of 1 Samuel. And the reason we wanted to choose kind of an Old Testament book was to show that the Bible really does have application to our lives, no matter kind of the story. There's a lot in Scripture that we can learn from. When the author wrote the Bible to an audience, he had a thrust, kind of a thing that he wanted to achieve in the writings. And so in this series, we're going to look at 1 Samuel and how we can learn about what it means to, year after year, be consistent in our faith. What little things, little steps can we apply to our faith today that will actually benefit us in the long run, even in the short term? Because I think a lot of times we have these New Year's resolutions, we want to grow, we want to mature, and so we get rid of bad habits and apply better habits, but we usually fail them, or we forget about them, or we get lazy. And so even in our faith, we can kind of become distant from God because we just forgot about what it means to actually have a thriving, life-giving faith. And so that's what we're going to be digging into today. But I want to ask you a question. It's kind of a weird question, but when was the last time you really poured out your soul? Now, I'm not saying these are synonymous with feelings or emotions necessarily, but kind of just this all out, I'm giving someone else my being, or in the conversation, I'm kind of just laying everything out on the table. Like all of your feelings, like a deep conversation. And I know in middle school it's hard to have even a normal conversation because we're all kind of just awkward and we don't like to talk to each other sometimes. But when was the last time you can think, if ever, maybe you have never, poured out your soul? Maybe it was on a Discord chat with your friends, or maybe it was just via messaging on Instagram, Facebook Messenger, or WhatsApp. But where you just shared your feelings. You poured out your soul. I'm not talking about your crush and talking about your love for them, or your love for Tom Holland or Zendaya. I'm not talking about that kind of pouring out your soul, which many of you have done and regretted, but pouring out your soul in terms of your emotions and your feelings. Now, I think a lot of us maybe haven't had this time with parents, or on retreat, maybe you had this time of pouring out your soul. But I'd encourage us to practice, and I think what we're going to look about in a second, practice what I would say kind of like an open prayer life. I think adopting an open prayer life would actually be beneficial for you. Spiritually, physically, emotionally, holistically good for you. Some of you don't really know much about prayer. You maybe pray before meal or before bedtime, or your parents pray, but you don't really have a prayer life. But in our faith, we are actually given, later we're going to talk about, access to God. And so, what's your prayer life look like? See, I think life, we can get in the habit of being really fake, really being shallow. But the beauty of an open prayer life means you can put everything on the table to God. You can put all your emotions, all your feelings, all your energy, your life. You can show God your life and be transparent. And so I think to be consistent in our faith means adopting this practice of prayer. Because I think we make excuses for prayer. We don't really know how to do it, maybe. Or we don't want to do it. Or we've tried prayer and we don't think God's listening. Or we think our problems are so minuscule that God doesn't care. Or maybe we think our problems are so big that God can't handle it. And so today we're going to look at prayer. We're going to be turning to the book of 1 Samuel. And in your walk-on, that's going to be day 1. I'm going to be reading from the walk-on today, which is a resource that we print here in Island Youth. It's a really awesome resource. We could sell this to other ministries. We could probably give it to other churches, but we've written it for you. And we use the NIV translation. So this isn't Island Youth's translation. This is the NIV translation. Same as the Well Bibles. So if you want to turn to either day 1 or page 185 in the Well Bible. But let me give you some context. Okay, so what we're about to see in the very beginning of 1 Samuel is this guy that has 2 wives. Now, I get it, that's not right, but that's the reality of this story. So this man, Elkanah, has 2 wives, one named Hannah, and one named Peninnah. Now, one of them, Hannah, cannot actually bear children. And the other one has borne lots of children. So you can imagine the drama that kind of unfolds in this family. There's probably a lot of animosity between the 2 wives. And I'm sure he was married to Hannah first, realized she couldn't bear her children, and so he probably got another wife, Peninnah. Now, Elkanah loves Hannah, but there's still struggle. There's still issues there. And so what we're about to read is this idea that year after year, they went to the temple to worship God. Year after year, there was a consistency where they went to the temple to pray. That was where God is back then. And so we're going to look at Hannah's prayer. It's kind of a famous prayer. We're not going to actually be looking at the prayer, but prior to that. What was going on? What was she struggling with? How can her prayer life how can we apply that to our prayer life? Okay? So if you will, we'll read probably till about verse 16 or 18. We'll see. But let's start off in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1. Starting verse 1. Here we go. There was a certain man from Ratham, a Zuhite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jerome, and son of Elihu, son of Tohu, and son of Zuph, and of Ephraimite. Verse 2. He had 2 wives, one called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Sheol, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord in the temple. Verse 4. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give some of the meat he sacrificed to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters and offspring. Verse 5. But to Hannah he had given her a double portion because he loved her. And the Lord had closed her womb. She couldn't have children. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival, Peninnah, kept provoking and teasing her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival, Peninnah, once again provoked her, so much that she wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? He's trying, but he is failing at trying to help her. All right, verse 9, or day 2 in the walk-up. Once, when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli, the priest at the time, was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the house of the Lord. In Hannah's deep anguish, she prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him up to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. So he's not getting a haircut. Verse 12. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, but her lips were moving, but no voice was heard. Eli, mistakenly, thought she was drunk and said to her, How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine. Hannah responded, Not so, my Lord. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. And we can stop there. But if you were to continue reading, the beautiful story continues till the end of the chapter, which is not much further. But Hannah eventually is given a son. God has given him a son. She calls him Samuel. And she raises him up till he's about 5 years old, till he's a young boy. And then she gives him to the temple to work in the house of the Lord. So a lot of things happen there. I kind of want us to break down what we saw, a couple of verses that we might have seen, to reveal kind of Hannah's prayer life, her journey. So she's introduced at verse 2, coming in, and then verse 3 talks about year after year, right? This annual coming to the Lord to worship. Now later we'll kind of see that we don't have year after year. We don't have to go to a temple. We don't have to go to ECC to worship necessarily. We can worship God wherever we are. But she makes this journey, this consistency, this discipline of worship. Then we see in verse 5 and 7, I kind of just labeled assorted pain. Because one is this pain of, I wish so much to bear a child. The one thing I really want to do, I actually can't do. I can imagine the grief that she's gone through for years. The animosity between the wives, the fighting. The hurt between probably her and her husband of not being able to bear a child. And then the other wife, really not helpful, is always teasing and poking at her. And they're fighting all the time. So she has this bitterness in her heart. Then she goes through kind of an emotional journey in verse 8, where she just doesn't eat. She's done. She's so frustrated. She's so grieved that she doesn't even eat. And then we see in verse 15, I have poured out my soul to the Lord. Meaning she places all of her emotions, all of her feelings on the table. Her prayers were probably very hardcore prayers. It was business. It was coming to God with hurt and pain and having Him deal with it. So what's wrong? And I'm kind of asking for her and then asking for us, what's wrong? Because there's a moment where she didn't want to touch food. She was like, I am so in anguish. I am so frustrated. I am so stressed out that I don't even want to eat. And then I'll kind of try to sympathize with her. He's like, aren't I greater than 10 sons? Don't you love me more than 10 sons? And she's like, get out of here, husband. You are no help at all. I'm not going to take any marriage advice from him. And so he's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And he's trying to fix the problem. But it's a problem that only God can actually fix. And I think there's going to be times in our lives where, yeah, we're going to be struggling. There's going to be pain. There's going to be things that we think someone can fix. We think a boyfriend can fix it. We think a girlfriend can fix it. We think our parents can fix it. Actually, it may be something that you're struggling with that only God can fix. And so bring your concerns to God. Now, this is a little ill-placed, but there's a meme that talks about, like, hey babe, what's wrong? Why aren't you eating you haven't even touched your meal, and it's like these weird meals. So it's like, hey babe, you haven't even touched your shoe, and it's like, shoe, soup, disgusting stuff. Hey babe, what's wrong? You barely touched your Minecraft spaghetti. Like, why would she eat that? It's gross. Babe, are you okay? You barely even touched your limited edition Sonic Curry that's super blue and will stain your mouth. That's so gross. Babe, there is something wrong. Please don't eat those things. But have you ever been that frustrated or like turned up inside that you don't want to eat? Like your mom comes, hey, what's wrong? You're not going to dinner? Or maybe you haven't had that moment, but maybe in the future, you'll be so frustrated that you just will not eat. I'm not hungry anymore. So I think something for us to remember, and guys, we have to remember this, but I think also some women, I know I've talked to Jess about this too. Emotions, what does it look like to put our emotions on display? Have our feelings. Some of us are more feeling-minded and more emotional, and some of us are just like, emotions are bad, keep them inside. Like Frozen, like, I can't show anybody my emotions or my superpower. Like, we are created as emotional beings, and I think it's important to remember that you don't have to shy away from your emotions. You don't have to hate your emotions. Like, you are an emotional being, and God created you that way. And so when you pray, when you communicate with God, it doesn't always have to come from this higher than thou, high church. I use all this fancy language. My prayer is 5 minutes. If your prayer isn't 5 minutes or you're not crying by the end, then you didn't really pray. Well, no, that's not true. You can have short prayers. But what does it look like to bring your emotions and feelings and your soul into your prayer? I think a lot of the times when we don't have a good prayer life is because we haven't actually invested our soul into the prayer. Prayer is just more of a ritual. It's more of a tradition than it is a life-giving benefit to our lives. So we are created as emotional beings. Next thing I kind of want to see that in Hannah's prayer is that Hannah had to go to a temple to pray with God. She had to connect in that way. That was kind of where they saw God in location base. But we, through Jesus, are given access to God. We are given access to pour out our soul. We get the opportunity to do that, right? There's no question too hard for God. There's no question too awkward for God. There's no problem too small that it's like, oh, he wouldn't care about this. Let me just not tell him. Or there's nothing too big that he cannot handle. So the beauty of prayer is that you can bring everything to the table. You can lay it all down, and God wants us to do that, to lament and pray. You don't have to be on an island youth retreat. You don't have to be somewhere. You can just pray with God. You don't need me to intercede for your prayer. You don't need to pray to St. Paul or St. Mary. You don't have to pray to Mary, to pray to Jesus, to pray to God. Like, you have direct access through Jesus to the Father. And what that means is that you can be yourself. You can display yourself without filter. A lot of time we think we have to pray. Oh, I have to pray. I haven't been praying. I have to pray. No. You get to pray. It is an opportunity. It's a blessing. You don't just have to pray. You get to pray. And that's a beautiful thing. There's that little illustration like who can wake up the king at 3 a.m. for a glass of water? Like, nobody but their children. And it's kind of just a fun story, kind of idea, is that when we approach God, it's because we have been adopted into his family, and we can approach God. We have been given access to God. So my final kind of takeaway is just imagine 2022. I'm not giving you this information out of Scripture so that you just have self-help, and that if you pray enough, things will get better. But what I'm saying is that I believe prayer is not just a spiritual benefit. I think it's a physical benefit. I think mentally, you are healthier when you pray. I think emotionally, you will be healthier if you pray to God. There's some things I don't want to tell other people. But guess what? I know I can always pray to God and communicate with Him. So you don't have to pray, but you get this opportunity to lay your emotions and feelings on the table. So imagine if you adopted this year. What would it look like to be consistent in your prayer time? I'm not saying you'll get everything you want. I'm not saying you'll make your life how you want it to go. But it's aligning our will with God's. It's asking God for peace. It's asking God for patience. When I don't know what to deal with, when I'm frustrated with my mom because the approval, I can't ever make her happy. When I'm frustrated with what's going on with my dad. When my friends are not acting like my friends. When academics or sports are too much for us to handle, God is always there. He has given us access through Jesus. And I believe prayer would be a huge benefit for your 2022.